Okay, nice to meet you.
You too.
It's very good to be in contact with a person who's so close. I mean, this was very impressive for me, introduction of your book that was speaking to my heart. And I wanted our representatives to hear it, but I couldn't read it.
Right.
I couldn't read it. Every time I began weeping. So Laura did it. So I feel a deep heart connection with what you do. I was particularly drawn to the chapter of the acknowledgements or thanksgivings that Robin Wall Kimmerer was talking about in her book, Braided Sweetgrass. I think you know it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we could have now 3/4 of an hour or even more just saying thank you to all the creatures and the powers that are supporting us and are caring for us. But in this time, we don't have the opportunity to say thank you to all of them. So I just wanted to mention this in the beginning, that I'm very grateful for all the creatures that brought me here and still are so strongly keeping our net of life living.
I agree.
And that brings me right back to where it started for me. Our garden plot ran out on the shore of a pond. It was an entire shore strip with wilderness of reeds and willow bushes, ducks and Canada geese nested there. And this was my nursery, my nest until I was 10, 12. I felt very close connection, and I had a tree when I felt some kind of sad, or I went climbing up the tree and feeling nurtured by it. And it was some time when I was 12, 14, that this piece of land was cut off from our place because the owner was the town of Hamburg and they wanted to have a park there. So when that happened, they made a pitch. They said there would protection place for the birds, but the dogs always jumped across, and the whole paradise, as I knew it, was gone. So when I was 14, I went to the Gartenbauamt and asked them to build a fence so that the dogs can't jump over. So that was my first encounter.
Good.
And I tried to protect what I felt was the source of my, at least, spiritual life. So now, what is your formative experience when growing up?
I always felt a very strong sense of horror at what was happening to the planet. It wasn't something that I learned one day later in life. Some of my very first memories are of that feeling, that I looked outside, and I grew up not in a rural environment at all. It was very kind of urban, suburban. It was right up against the city. So it was all cement and buildings and cars. And there were trees that lined the streets, but there was no wilderness. I mean, it was just shade trees, which were very beautiful, but I wanted trees. And I just remember, even as a very young child, the things that I wanted the forest, I wanted deer, and I wanted wolves. I don't know where I even knew about wolves and deer, but that was what I wanted. And when I looked out the window, all I saw was cement. And it broke my heart. And then we would drive places, like to go see my grandmother or go wherever, you know, you just go on a family trip. And it just went on and on and on for miles. Like you never got to wilderness. No matter which direction you went in, it was just more of the same, just cement and cars and people and buildings. And like, where is the wild?
Yeah.
Where is the place for the wild? Is there nothing left of the wild? And it was such a wound in me, you know, for so many years. And I always wondered too, like, do other people feel this, but we just don't talk about it? Or does everybody feel this? Like, I can't be the only one who feels this. Because it was so strong. It was like breathing. Like, where is the wild? Yeah. And I think most children do feel something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe some of them learned to shut it off sooner than I did. But it just, my whole life, that's what it was just with, who is protecting the wild? What's left out there? Like, I didn't have one incident. It was just always there. Like we call it biophilia, you know, just that love of life.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, mine was just always very present to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's certain incidents I can point to, like the last little bits of scraps that weren't developed yet. It'll be like an acre or two. I mean, tiny little bits. And it would just bring me such joy that there were kind of wild weeds and, you know, stringy trees, and maybe you might see a rabbit if you were really lucky. And then one day there were houses going up, and that was the end of it. So I was like, well, that's the last.
Yeah.
It was the last little bit of wild space on my walk to school was just gone. You know, because they put up 6 houses, and that was the end of it. And there's still 6 houses there. So all of that just broke my heart more. So I was very glad when I found, you know, as a young teenager, different writings, and I suddenly realized, oh, there's this thing happening that's Earth Day. There's like, there's a movement of people who actually care about this. So my goal was like, I got to find them at some point. But reading as much as I could, just to try to, was always my goal, was just to try to understand, why are we doing this? Why do people hate trees? Why? Why would you destroy the wild?
Yeah.
It's where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And to this day, I don't really understand it. I mean, clearly I fight it, but in my heart of hearts, I still don't get it. I don't understand why people hate the wild. So.
Yeah. In 1968, I was 16. School was a horror for me.
Yeah.
And of course, I wanted a different world. I was in pupil space group at the college, space group that was political, organizing school strikes, and so later I was in a country commune, and of course I liked Grateful Dead and the Doors. Smoked hash and took a few LSD trips. We know today, after all, that hash helps synchronize the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And I think that helped me to see the world a little deeper. And also it helped me to keep a contact with the living world, because you are so cut off from everything in our society. And that was also the time when the environment movement took off and health food stores started popping up. And I was part of that. What did you do at this age? And did you find a connection with this movement? Because the hippies, and also especially in the United States, they had the Vietnam War and the communities in the country.
So I was born in 1964, so I'm a little bit younger than you. My parents were very involved in some of those things. So I come by it honest. I feel like I'm a very radical apple that fell from a very liberal tree, so I didn't go very far. I just took it to the next direction. But they were very opposed to the Vietnam War. My father was actually an immigrant from Europe. He was a refugee after World War II. So he had lived in Germany in a displaced persons camp when he was a young child. They were from Latvia, so they had to flee the Soviet Union. So they lived here, and they were in Dresden for all of that horror. And then eventually they got visas to go to the United States. So they arrived in 1950. And then they landed in Philadelphia. And then my parents met in around 1960, and then I was born in 64. So that's kind of that history. But, you know, they were absolutely against the war. And my father became an engineer. And a lot of time, most engineers work for defense contractors. It's where the money is, it's where the jobs are. And he just really didn't want to do it. It's just... didn't want to make weapons. So he made other things. But I just feel like my background was, I was very primed to be who I am in a way. I'm not sure what they expected, but they definitely taught me to think for myself, and that it was always just more important to, you didn't have to do what everybody else did. Like it was more important to follow your conscience. Yeah, was a much more important thing. Like even if it meant you weren't going to have a lot of friends, that wasn't what mattered. Like fitting in, was not the important thing. The important thing was to really just be a thoughtful person, and whatever that meant, to be a person of conscience. You know, to be a more full person than just following the crowd. So that I got early. You know, that you didn't have to be like everybody else. So that was important. Yeah. And then, watching them protest as much as they could. It was hard because, they had kids and they had to pay the bills. So they weren't able to do as much as they wanted. But my father was very involved in party politics. Every time there was an election, he volunteered at the polls. So he would go and, be one of those poll workers. But he got very discouraged by it because the corruption just became more and more apparent. Yeah. So he got, he was very, I don't know, I think it just... it was hard in the 70s because we had Richard Nixon, and that, I think, really devastated a lot of people, that level of just criminality was in the government. I think a lot of people found that hard. So he gave up on all of it because it was like, there's no point, money and power always win, essentially. So that's hard. My mother, I think, stayed a little more idealistic about things and was a very strong feminist. So I got a lot of that from her. She went to consciousness raising, and it was not a happy marriage. So they got divorced. And my mother really had to make her way. So I learned a lot from her about just how to be independent and make sure that, you're not subservient to anybody ever, that you can always support yourself. That was the most important thing. And that was a message I got really strongly. So all of that, I think, really, played a role in me just learning to be a thoughtful person who could critique. There was no limit to what I was allowed to critique. I really was allowed to just question anything that I saw that I didn't think was right. I was encouraged to do that. So that was sort of that really good foundation, I think, which is why I think I came to it so young, because, I mean, honestly, by the time I was 14, 15, 16, it was like, where do I find the radicals? Like, there's got to be people out there. I can't be the only one who thinks this, who can see how bad this is. How do I find people who are going to be, as impassioned about this as I am? And it was hard because I couldn't find people who were as radical as I was. You could find issues, like you could join the anti-nuclear thing. And all of these things are important. I'm not saying they're not, but there was no overall framework. That was the hard part to find, was who's going to actually analyze, how we ended up here. Is there a name for the whole system? It's like, it's way bigger than just capitalism. That's important to name, but that's just one small part of it. We've clearly been destroying the planet way longer than capitalism. So, and also the Soviet Union is destroying the planet, and communist China is destroying the planet. It's not just capitalism. I get that that's an accelerant, but that's not the actual problem. So all of that's like swirling around in my head, and I'm trying sort of group after group, and I'm trying to join this and that. And like, none of it really was the whole thing, that made it hard. And even when I found radical feminists who, very often have a very strong ecofeminism, there's a lot of ecology wrapped up in the radical feminism, especially, and I'm thinking Susan Griffin and Mary Daly. Those books were foundational to who I became. But even in those circumstances, I still sometimes would get in these huge arguments about, like, why are we destroying the planet? And it's not okay to do this. And I remember, this is going to be a longer story, but I remember I was 22 and I was hanging out with my, my really intense radical feminist friends, and we were really going to make the revolution, damn it. And we had gone for this. I was living in a more rural area then. I was much happier. So we were out in the country, and there was a swimming place you could go. There was this river. And so we went to the river to have a little picnic and spend the afternoon there. Summer, beautiful day. And then there's a little plaque on the side of the wall, and it says, this river used to be called Salmon Falls. And that's pretty much all it says. And then the Native American people would come here and collect salmon. And then, until whatever, 1800, it was called Salmon Falls. And that's the end of the story. And I'm like, why is it not called Salmon Falls anymore? And then you look across to the river, and what do you see? This is an enormous dam across the river for electricity. I'm like, well, of course it's not called Salmon Falls. There haven't been salmon in this river probably for 200 years. Because first it would have been dammed for the mills, because they just used the physical energy.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we're doing electricity with it.
Yeah.
Well, there went the salmon. And then I'm looking up, and you see that the riverbed is like mostly dry. I mean, you can see the bones of the riverbed where the water should be.
Yeah.
And I'm sure twice a day they're doing releases just to spin the turbines so that we can have electricity. But the river's dead.
Yeah.
There's not a single living. I mean, there's spiders and things around the edges, but there's no fish in this river. And then I'm thinking of all the stories I've read of, oh yeah, you know, I've heard this, that hundreds of years ago, you could walk across these rivers. Yeah. They were so dense with fish. You could just walk across the water. You didn't have to be Jesus. This was just life on a living planet, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really freaked out at this point because I put all this together just from observing. Like, nobody told me. It was just like, oh, it used to be called Salmon Falls. Where are the salmon? Oh, there's a dam. Well, they're dead. Oh, look at the river. It's just dry bones. And my heart is breaking. Yeah. Like, here's this beautiful spot, and we're supposed to be having a fun time, and we're all going to go swimming, and it's a summer day. And of course, I'm going to bring it all down. Because I'm like, this used to be called Salmon Falls, people. There's no salmon, and that's why. And we had this huge argument, all of us. It went on all day. I was like sobbing by the end of it. I was like, you're supposed to be my friends. I thought you understood this. We cannot kill rivers. Like, why would you think that's a good thing? Yeah. I'm horrified in my bones that we could kill a river. Yeah. What kind of sociopath kills a river? Where are the fish? Where are they going to live if they don't have a river? And then what are the bears going to eat? Yeah. And then what are the trees going to eat? We're killing the world. And for what? And you're supposed to be the people who understand this with me, and you don't. And it killed, oh God, it just killed me. I was like, I thought I'd found people who really understood this, and they didn't quite. You know? They were all on the other side. Well, we need electricity. For what? Why do we need it? We haven't needed it for 2 million years. Yeah. In fact, people were a lot healthy before we had it. And I know the archaeological evidence here. People were really tall and beautiful. And like, we didn't need, and there's still people all around the globe who don't have it. And they don't want to kill their rivers for it. Like, I know there's people fighting this stuff. So why are you saying, like, it never came back together for me. Like, I never could find a way to explain it to them. And what they were telling me just horrified me, like that they were defending this. Anyway, I'm sure you have stories like that too, but it broke my heart. Yeah, not that in that extremely, but at this point I would come to maybe part of the answer, because when I was about 20, I was in a self-help group of heroin addicts. Oh yeah, okay. Who were freeing themselves from addiction. It was self-help. They were mixed groups, and people like me who had never taken heroin were also integrated. The approach here was, from the whole society is rank and addictive. Sure. So we need a different social order. Yeah. And we need another way of living together. And I met several heroin addicts, and they were very good at lying to themselves. Right. Addicts always are, yeah. And others, of course. Yeah. And when it came to their addiction, they knew no morals. They'll steal from anybody. Very nice humans, but addiction means first you have to keep increasing the dose and keep going even if you know you will die early from it. Yeah. And so I see a parallel with our civilization. Yep. The hunger for energy is still increasing. Every day. And even if it leads to a planetary collapse, no one can free from that. So how do you see that, I think? Well, in our book, one of the things we talk about, and a concept that I hope people can adopt, is that we are solving for the wrong variable. And what that means is, instead of putting the earth first and saying, well, what can the earth sustain? How many humans could actually live here without hurting anything? How many humans could the earth actually support in that way? Well, that's not ever the question. The question we always get asked is, well, how can we have all this stuff and still have a living planet? And the answer is you can't, because you can't have your planet and eat it too. And we have been eating it now for 10,000 years. And they don't want to face the reality of the situation. And I'm not even 100% sure what it is they're all addicted to, because this way of life has not made us happy. I can tell you in the United States, half of all the adults, literally half of people have been on an antidepressant.
Yeah.
It has not made us happy to live like this. It has made us the loneliest, saddest, most addicted people in the world. I mean, the meth and the heroin and the opioid crisis now, my country is just falling to pieces around me.
Yeah,
but
that's exactly what happens with addiction.
Yeah, it always accelerates.
It's just
always
more and more. A high.
Yeah.
And
crash, and then you need more.
Yeah.
And this is what we're doing to the planet. And this is one of those things that even if I understand it intellectually, I can't understand it. I don't.
Emotional.
It's so ugly on top of everything else. It's so horrible what we're doing. I can't understand getting a rush from it, but clearly they do. Because I have read so many historical accounts, how much fun they all had. It was like they went mad destroying the bison. They went mad destroying the wetlands. They went completely crazy when they wiped out this seabird or that seabird. The writers will say over and over, it was like a madness took over these men, and they had to kill every single one of them on the island. And it's like, I will never understand that. Clearly they're getting some kind of a, I don't know what. And then writ large, here we are, getting more oil, getting more coal. Every single day we have to have more. For what? For cell phones even?
This is something the Native Americans must have felt when they were confronted with. They were. What is
wrong with these people?
And even as a young boy, I was fascinated by the Indians, and I read a lot about them and felt with them how they were driven off their land and how they were deprived of their livelihood, how they were annihilated. And the Red Power movement with Wounded Knee in 1973 had a lot of resonance in Germany. And of course, I was involved. I did distribution of Acquisition notes in Germany.
Yeah, that's great.
And organized a performance by Russell Means and Clyde Belcourt.
Very nice.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In Hamburg I did, and I am from Hamburg. And in the course of these activities, I got to know Waltraud Wagner, who had founded a working group for North American Indians. She was in contact also with Tom Porter from the Iroquois Nation. And her daughter is my wife now since 40 years. 40 years. So, with my connection with the Red Indians, I met my wife. So that was something. And what her mother also, she was about a fundamental questioning of civilization and the completely different worldview of the indigenous people. You are very much closer to that. To what extent have the indigenous people of Turtle Islands influenced you?
I would say very profoundly.
Yeah.
I have similar stories to you. And I also, it was historically, I feel like there's a very tremendous gift that was given by the women of the Northeast tribes to the women of the world. Because that first wave of feminism from the United States, where they were working for suffrage, but a lot of other things as well. I mean, that was only one part of their goal. But the women who founded that movement in the United States, if you read the history of it, they were all from the same region, which was upstate New York. So the rural area, not the city, but much further to the north.
Hudson River.
Yeah, way up. And in that region, they were all from there.
Yeah.
And it was always, and where they had the first convention for women's rights was in Seneca Falls. It's the same region. Well, it's named after the Seneca Indians.
Yeah.
So the Seneca were part of the Iroquois Confederacy. Or I shouldn't say were. They're still around. They still want their land back.
Yeah.
So that the Iroquois Confederacy is these, these 6 tribes of these different bands that live in the region, and they are very matrifocal, matrilineal, very beautiful people.
Yeah.
And the thing that really stands out when you look into this as a feminist is that they were what's called a rape-free culture, that there was no violence against women. The men treated women with utter respect. and the women held a lot of the power.
Yeah.
So even if a man did misbehave, he would have been thrown from the community immediately. There was simply no chance to behave this way. So they had no battering. There was no rape. There was no prostitution. There was nothing like that in this culture. And so the historic document really shows that Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the real radicals of the women's suffrage movement, were very, very entwined with the friendships with the women who were the Native American women from the Seneca tribe, especially because that's where they lived. In fact, Matilda Jocelyn Gage was adopted into the Seneca tribe as an adult because the friendships were so strong and so heartfelt. They adopted her in and they gave her a name, and there was a big ceremony, all this. So they had this incredible vision about the world that they wanted, that would be this egalitarian, peaceful, sort of gynocentric, woman-centered way. They didn't just dream that up. They saw it in action because they were friends with women who were from those cultures. Yes. And they were taught by those women, like, this is not the way things have to be. And they would go to some of the meetings and they would see the men and the women talking together in a circle where everybody's voice got heard.
It's not something that is utopian and you just dream further. It's not
They
possible.
saw it happening. They saw it in real life. And Matilda Jocelyn Gage wrote in her journal how incredible it was to go to the village there, the Seneca village, and she said you could walk around at 2 o'clock in the morning with complete safety. There was no fear at all that any of these men would assault you, threaten you, harass you. You could just wander around totally free, something she never could experience in the white world, in a city. It would be terrifying to be a woman out alone at night. And then there's all these other really fun little things, like these journal entries from other kind of schoolgirls or sort of younger women who, it was a big thing back then to go out into the nature and do like sketches and try to find new mushrooms or sketch the life forms that you would see there. It was the naturalist sort of thing was happening very big. And these young girls, teenage girls, would go out and the young Indian men would take them on and show them the paths and everybody knew it was completely safe. Yes. You could let your 15-year-old daughter go out with these 20-year-old young men and nothing was going to happen to them. They would be utterly respected. Yes. Not a finger laid on them. It was completely unthinkable for these men. Yeah. So I just feel like anyone who's a feminist, we owe such a profound debt to these women. Yeah. Because they were still keeping their culture alive, and I start crying, but they taught the European women that there's a better way. Yeah. You don't have to live like this. Yeah. And it was such an inspiration to those women. Yeah. And that's why I'm a radical feminist. Yeah. Like, that's where it came from. Yeah. Sorry. It always makes me really emotional. So anyway, that's where I got it. Yeah. It's from those women. But just in my life as well, certainly the Native American people who have been willing to be, friendly or friends even with me, I've gotten just so much, just even with little things sometimes, like they have the exact right. They just understand it on a spiritual level in a way that I just never could. It's like, and they're, oh God, poor you. Like, nobody's told you this yet. I'm like, no, nobody told me this yet. And I'll give you just one more funny example. Back when because I wrote a book about, I had been a vegan for 20 years and I really wrecked my health. And then I had to sort of crawl my way out. And then I had to try to figure out, well, why doesn't this work? So I have a book called The Vegetarian Myth. But there's a moment in that book where I was really, really grappling with this notion that my life was dependent on death. Because when I was a vegan, I didn't believe that, and I didn't want it to be true. And I really thought that if I was just eating plants, it didn't count. And I never could be at peace with that, because to me, plants were always really alive. I mean, I've talked to trees. And I was like, I know this isn't actually true, but I just didn't know how to make peace with any of it. Because I didn't want anything to die. I didn't want there to be any harm to any living creature for me to just live, right? And so the vegan thing collapses. I can barely get out of bed. I'm so sick, like on and on. And I had this Native American friend, and I'm pouring my heart out to her once, like, that something has died. I don't want anything to die. And she just cuts me right off, and she's like, Lierre, for something to live, something else has to die. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. She's right. For the tree to live, there have to be dead animals, because that's what makes the soil. It's like dead plants and dead animals. And then the tree takes up the nutrients. But I know what's in the soil because I've tried to garden, and it's dead plants and dead animals. Like, that's what keeps it going. It's like, we're all just taking turns, aren't we? She's like, yeah.
So it's a cycle.
Yeah, and I couldn't make peace with it until she said that. It's like every living thing is dependent on every other living thing that has to die. Yeah. And then you're the dead thing. And then somebody eats you. Yeah. But then you're part of the bird, and you're part of the tree, and you're part of the baby fox. You don't ever really die. It's that cycle, and it's the circle that's important. That's what we fight for. I was like, oh, thank God somebody explained it to me. And I was able to just let it go in that moment. I put it to rest. Yeah. It's like, she's right. But I couldn't figure it out on my own. Yeah. Like, she had that wisdom, from her grandparents, I'm sure. Yeah. And I just couldn't work my way through to it. Maybe in a decade I would have got there, but she was just like, no, just stop. It's okay. It's like, they're going to have to die to feed you, but you're going to die to feed them. Yeah. And it's all right. That's what it is. And it's amazing, isn't it, to be alive? It's amazing. Like, you just pray. That's all it is. Just pray. You'll be all right. She was right. So it's stories like that I have a lot of, where they've given me so much.
I think this is their worldview, where they see always the cycle. Yeah. And what we are doing is to break up the cycle.
Breaking it.
In a linear way. And then it's death. Yeah. Not before. Yeah. As long as the cycle goes, there's no death in the end.
So I like to say there's the death that's the part of the cycle, and we just have to do that well. That's our job. Yeah. And then there's the death that's killing the cycle. Yeah. That's what we have to stop. Yeah. They're two very different things, but I had a very hard time sorting that. So yeah.
So I want to come to another point, because I was impressed when I read about Justus von Liebig. He is the inventor of artificial fertilizers. But he said in his later writings, agriculture is thoroughly spiritualized and animated. He studied Japanese and Chinese farming methods extensively, in contrast to Roman, and the sharply attacked contemporary agriculture doctrine. He really was totally upset what happened with his inventions. He said,
right. This is not what I wanted.
Yeah. And so you have...
I'm further over. I think agriculture is the problem. Yeah. I think you can try to do it well, but so what is agriculture? You have to ask. You take a piece of land and you clear every last living creature off it, and then you just use it.
But is that true?
Yes, that is what agriculture is.
I mean, when I read about Vandana Shiva, Sir Albert Howard, who brought biological agriculture, right. He said he couldn't make out what was gardens and what was wilderness, because it was all interconnected. So there's also, there's not only generally biological agriculture, but also permaculture.
Okay, I'll make some distinctions if you want. Okay. So agriculture is annual grains. And the only way you're going to get that seed to grow is if you clear all the plants off of that ground. Yes. So if you want to grow corn or wheat or rice, whatever it is, like, you already know what you have to do. If there's a tree in the way, you have to take it down. If there's grass on the ground, you're going to have to plow it up. And then that seed has a chance of growing. And that's why I say that's what agriculture is. You have to clear the land. Yeah. Completely clear it. It's the only way to get those seeds to sprout. Mm-hmm. So the question is about agriculture and whether or not this can be sustained. And my answer is no, that I think agriculture is the problem. And that's because it's based on annual crops, annual grains. Yeah. And in order for them to grow, the land has to be cleared. And this is because in nature, there's two different categories of plants. And one is perennials. They live a long time. And the other is annuals. And they only live a very short time, 2 or 3 seasons at most. And they fulfill different functions in the land. So most plants, and over 90% of the plants, are perennials. So trees. Nothing's going to grow that tall in 2 seasons, right? So you get right away that those are perennials. But it's the same for grasses. There are grasses that can live, decades. And because these plants live a long time, they tend to have very, very deep root systems. So the roots go down, 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 down. Trees, just everywhere is roots. And in a healthy grassland, the roots can be 10, 12, 15 feet deep. Just an amazing complexity of roots. Most of the life on a grassland happens underneath the surface of the soil because it's too dry on the top. And so all the life happens underneath. We don't see it, but it's there, and that's really where it's happening. And the point is that if you're going to grow, so the annuals, the reason that there are annuals is because on occasion there is a disaster in nature. So there's a fire, there's a flood, there's an earthquake, something happens, and temporarily the land is cleared. So imagine like a landslide off a mountain, or there's a big fire and now it's just black everywhere. That's the moment when the annuals are waiting. So they have these really big seeds. And the reason their seeds are so big is because their entire future depends on that. That's the only way they have to reproduce, is through that seed. So they tend to be big, and they're coated in a lot of protection, and they're given a lot of nutrients to get started. Okay, and that's why they're worth eating. That's why humans ever would eat them, is because they're big enough that you can just manage to get more calories out by harvesting them. The little tiny seeds, no one's going to bother. It takes more effort than it's worth. But the big seeds, yeah. So the land is cleared. Now in the soil, these seeds have been waiting, sometimes for hundreds of years. This is their moment. There's no competition. They cannot outcompete the grasses and the trees. But when those are gone temporarily, they spring to life. And the reason they do this, speaking as a planet, is because it's a biological emergency to have the soil bare. Land life understands that you're not supposed to have the soil bare ever. So I like to think of it as, if you cut your hand, that's an emergency. And so you might get stitches to pull it back together. You might have to put a big bandage on it really tight for a while. Eventually, your skin knits back together. You don't need the stitches anymore. The stitches, the Band-Aid, that's the annuals. They're covering the ground as fast as they can. Eventually, the perennials are going to knit back together. There will again be all those roots underneath. The soil will once again be covered by grasses, by leaves, by the forest duff. All of that will come back, and the soil will be fine again. But in that brief period of time, the annuals explode. They do their job. They set seed. The seeds are once more buried. If there's ever an emergency, they're lying in wait. And that's how nature works. Well, we're doing that emergency over and over and over again when we do agriculture, because we want those giant seeds, because they're worth eating. Also, they're addictive. It's really the reason that we started doing this. Wheat, super addictive. It's all addictive.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's what you have to do to make them grow, is you have to clear the land. Well, just even on a philosophical level, morally, I don't think we have the right to do that to a piece of land, just to clear it for us. No other creature does that. I don't know why we think that's okay. But when we do it, what it means is all those creatures, the plants, the animals, they get pushed off. So it's mass extinction, which is what it's been around the globe. Every single day, 200 more species are going extinct. And it's because of this pattern, this agriculture. So as you watch it spread around the world, it's just mass extinction after mass extinction. It pushes everywhere. It takes what it wants. It grabs the human culture, destroys the humans that are involved as well. And eventually it took everything. There's no more land that it can take. It's every square inch that could be devoted to annual grains has been so devoted. And every year when you do this activity, you are again having to bare the ground and plant those seeds. So it also means we're destroying the soil. And soil is, of course, the basis of land life, not ocean life, but all the land life. We owe our entire existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. We need the soil and a little bit of moisture, and then everything else can happen. But we're destroying the soil when we do this. And so bit by bit, sometimes very dramatically. So you can see photographs of the first day of what was called the Dust Bowl in the United States. They tore up the prairie using the steel plow. Nobody before that was able to do it. The roots were so dense across that grassland that you couldn't do it with just a regular, what they call the moldboard plow. It couldn't be done. But the moment that man named John Deere invented the steel plow, it was over, and the thing was just ripped to pieces. And then, because there were no more roots holding the soil, it all blew in the wind. So there was this thing called the Dust Bowl, where all the soil just blew across the continent and out into the Atlantic Ocean. And it was just these, you can see the camera had already been invented, so you can see these photographs. There's these mountains of soil drifting across the continent. And that was 12 feet of soil just gone. And there were farms that lost all their soil literally in one day because there were no roots there to hold it in place. So this is the nature of agriculture. You can lose 2,000 years of soil in one season of planting wheat or corn or soy or whatever. Now, people get confused because there are other ways that humans interact with the land to get their food. And one would be called horticulture. Another would be called, of course, the hunter-gatherers. And then, one version of that would be fishing cultures. So, coastal or ocean dwelling kinds of, people along the coastlines and stuff like that. And then you also have pastoralism. So you can see very easily from hunter-gatherer, you would be following the herd. And then bit by bit, you and the herd would become more aligned, more alike. And then this sort of domestication might begin, because the ones that are more interested in hanging out with humans will start to do that. The humans realize, well, if we behave this way, the animals do this. Well, that's pastoralism. So all of those I separate from agriculture, because all of those, kinds of activities, they leave the basic skeleton of the plants in place. You don't rip them all up. You leave the trees, you leave the grasses, you leave the wetlands. You're mostly just taking your nutrition from inside a living biotic community. Agriculture is the one that's different, because you take it all. You have to destroy it all to plant these crops. Also, agriculture marks the beginning of global warming. Especially rice agriculture has been incredibly destructive. And it's because of the paddies, the rice paddies, it's the standing water, and all the plant matter that's underneath. It only degrades using anaerobic decomposition. And that spells one word, which is methane. So the actual beginning of global warming goes back in history a little bit to the beginning of agriculture, but the moment they start doing rice agriculture, up it goes. You can absolutely see the carbon tick. And in fact, if you took, so we're going to take the year 1800 as the beginning of the industrial age, all the carbon that's been added 1800 to present, if you go back 10,000 years, the same amount of carbon was added because of agriculture to the atmosphere. So obviously, we've done the same amount in 200 years. Fossil fuel was an enormous accelerant to this process, but it was already started way back then. Because when you add, the methane, but also just destroying the soil by adding the oxygen, it just degrades really quickly. The biological activity increases, the soil just vaporizes, and where does it go? Well, the carbon goes up. That's the only place for it to go. Yeah. So that's the problem. And then also, we can keep going with this, but it creates this pattern of human society there's a name for it, and it's civilization.
Yeah.
And that's the pattern, and it's based on agriculture. You have to have agriculture to have that specific pattern, because what it means is people living in cities. If you have people living in cities, it means that they have overshot their land base. Okay, there's no way you could support this many people living in this square mileage of land. And that means that the food, the water, the energy, everything has to come from somewhere else. You have to import your basic stuff just to survive. Well, the problem is nobody willingly gives up their land, their water, their trees, their fish, any of it. So you're going to have to conquer them because you need it. And this is why agricultural civilizations always end up militarized. It may take 2,000 years, but eventually they get there. So eventually you're going to have slavery, you're going to have militarism, you're going to have imperialism, you're going to have genocide, and then it's just going to keep condensing. And then you've got these enormous bloated power centers all around the globe, and the pattern just extends and extends. And then eventually it collapses, and then it springs up another few hundred miles away because it's already been established. So you can follow it around the Mediterranean, over, 5,000-6,000 year period from the Bronze Age on. That's all they're doing is just shifting power center to power center, and they're wrecking more and more of the land. So into northern Africa, that desert is entirely human created. That fed the Roman Empire. That was once, wheat fields, and it's now just desert. And you can go around the globe and you'll see the same thing everywhere. It's just desert. That's where it is. And you can try to make it a little bit better by, some of the more traditional practices are you leave it fallow for a year or two. You put it back into pasture for a year or two. So you plant back the meadow that you took out, and then you let the ruminants come back and graze on it. Yep, that's true. That will restore some of it. And you will build a little soil when you do that. But the only way you're actually going to build topsoil, permanently, the way that nature does, is just to leave it be. Because every time you get back in there with the plow, you're drawing it down again. So then, all right, in 2 years, we'll go ahead, we'll let it lay fallow, and then we'll put back the manure, and then we'll... So you can sort of keep on that rotation, but year by year, you're drawing down a little bit because it's really not nature's pattern. It's not what nature wants. And you're fighting that war again because the other animals and all the plants that want to be there can't be there. And it's only the ones that we want, that we allow. So it's the war. It's the oldest war ever. And it's to me, it's like everybody went, well, what can we do? What can we do? I'm like, stop fighting this war. please just let the grasses come home, let the forest come home, let the beavers bring back the wetlands. Then we will restore this planet. And I still think that the grasses and the wetlands together could sequester the carbon. I don't think we're past the point of no return. I know I'm alone in this pretty much, but I've looked at the numbers. I think they can get it done, but we need to start now. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. I think what you're describing is really more horticulture and more pastoralism, and of course permaculture originally was based on that principle.
Yeah.
You know, the number one rule of permaculture was build topsoil. That was what Bill Mollison said. That's our number one. That's our first commandment, is build topsoil. You're not going to do that growing annual crops. You will do it growing perennial crops, so tree crops. You know, you want your pecan tree and your apple tree, and then it's grazed by pigs or goats or whatever. Absolutely, you could do that till the sun burns out, because you're building soil. Because the tree is there permanently. You're not plowing. So
how can we survive?
There are way too many people on this planet. There's nothing that we can do at this number of population that is sustainable. Yeah. And that's a very hard thing for people to face. Like, nothing that I say is honestly that difficult as an intellectual exercise. It's pretty basic stuff, really. I don't feel that smart. I just put it together in maybe a way that maybe somebody else hadn't heard yet. The problem really is our attachments and our emotional reaction to this, because yes, there's 8 billion people. There's no way our planet can support that. I think at the level of degradation that we have, we might be able to support 300 million. But it's never going to be 8 billion.
But is this not also a question that is connected with feminism?
Yes.
With the question how far women are deciding about children.
Yeah. We got 2 things to say here. One is that hunter-gatherers are very, very good at keeping their populations at a sustainable number. Yeah. They always know what that number is. And I'm not saying it's fun to have to stay at that number, because it usually, historically, has involved infanticide. And this is not something that I'm promoting. I think it would be really hard to have to do that. But on the other hand, if you didn't do it, the other option was that everybody starved. They knew the exact number of dependents and the exact number of productive adults could keep everything going. And if we have one more person, we're going to be on drawdown. There won't be enough fish, ultimately. There won't be enough deer, whatever it is you're eating. There won't be enough. We know this. We can take this many and no more. Because we tried it 5,000 years ago, and we were all hungry for a long time. So, you know, the wisdom gets handed down. You just cannot have more than this many children. And then they do it.
The mother would take care that her children have enough to eat. So
So everybody knew that, and you had to do what was expected. And I'm not saying that, again, that it was any fun, but people understood that there was a limit to the number of people that could live there without everybody going hungry in the winter. So that is one thing, is that the hunter-gatherers, and the moment you had agriculture, it just explodes, because that is broken. You have this surplus year after year. Now, it's only temporary long-term, but it's there. And that's what makes civilization possible, is because then you can have this sort of stratified sort of dissection of who is doing what work. So that sort of labor gets broken up into different parts. And so then you have skilled craftsmen, and then you have the yeoman farmers, and then you have the slaves. But on top of all of that is what you have is the soldiers. So you've got a permanent class of people who don't have to get food. All they do is war.
Okay, but this is a very, very big question. And
the feminism part is very important, though, because around the world, there's already, I think, 44 countries that have either a stable or a negative population rate, growth rate. So all you have to do is figure out, well, how does that happen? And this has really been studied very thoroughly, and it's not hard. You just have to raise the status of women. And the number one thing that does that around the planet is simply teaching girls to read. And what this says is that if girls and women have even the tiniest little bit of power over their lives, and particularly their reproductive lives, they choose to have fewer children. So all you have to do is let women make the decisions, and they'll do it. As it turns out, the people's desire for children is quite plastic. That if you live in a world where the government, the state, whatever you want to call it, is putting tremendous pressure on people to have more babies because we need more soldiers, we need more factory workers, and they put that kind of pressure on people and adds a few carrots and sticks in there, people will have more and more and more children. Like, they'll do it. And then if you pull back and you give them other options in life and sort of explain, how the situation lies, they'll have fewer and fewer children. I'm not talking about like the one-child horrors of China here. Like we don't have to have these like just wretched human rights kinds of interventions into this. We just have to give people access to just basic things like food and healthcare and housing. Once people are stable, just in terms of physical safety, and then let women make decisions. As it turns out, most couples want 2 children, which is replacement levels. And there's always going to be some of us who don't want any. There's going to be a few people who really want a big family. But it really stables out around there. People, like there's sort of a point where their personal fulfillment is reached at 2. And more than that, it starts to really detract from what they feel like they can do with their lives as well. Because we're not just parents, we're other things too. You know, you're a piano player and you're a gardener and you're whatever, a book writer, whatever your thing is, you know, you want to do other things as well. So I think that that plays in there. Like 2 is about right for most people. Like that's just enough. Raising a young person to adulthood is a long job, and that's just enough, I think, for most people. And that's just been proven true around the world in places where they've tried it.
It's real radical.
Yeah. Well, we're up against the Catholic Church. We're up against, you know, like some really big institutions that don't want this truth to be told.
Yeah. And
that's what we have to fight. So it's, again, one of those things that's actually really simple, but incredibly hard. Because it's always, I always say it's not about people versus planet, it's people plus planet, right? Like, if we care for the least of us, which would be little girls of color, essentially, are the ones, if they get what they need, the rest of us are going to be fine. And they will make the right decisions, because women generally do. So we just have to care about the people who are at the very bottom of the human hierarchy, and the planet will be fine. But what it means to care for them is we have to take apart all these other institutions that are completely in the wrong direction, and they have all the power. So yes, we are going to need some really strong, committed, very smart, savvy political movements to bring this down, because we are going to have to bring it down.
Yes, if it doesn't
collapse on its own.
Yes. Anyway, we have this book where you have written a part of, and we know about the green movement, and you and me, we both have seen and were part of it, engaged in some way. And then the focus was more on climate than on nature and our other creatures. I think turning point was Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. But when did you realize that it was all going completely wrong direction with the movement?
Yeah, probably somewhere in there. Somewhere between Bill McKibben and Al Gore.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, they're bringing this emergency to our attention, and that's good. You know, I'm glad that that's being done. But all of a sudden, the entire environmental movement just became, well, we have to save the climate. And I would be fine with that if they were actually facing the true nature of the problem. But they're not. Because what they're trying to do is save civilization. And they're very clear about that. What they want to save is this way of life. So the entire goal now is to find a way to power industrial production so that we're not burning fossil fuel anymore. So instead of trying to stop industrial production, which was my goal, because I would actually like the planet to survive, they're not trying to do that. And they're very clear that they're not trying to do that. Like literally, they say over and over again, we want to save civilization. So they want to keep this way of life. They just want to power it some other way. It's completely at odds with the actual environmental movement.
Is it not that all the people here in our civilization who would be willing to live without slaves? I mean, the washing machine, the car, everything you can... So it's maybe a kind of addiction, but also very few people are willing to go out and grow their food, or they can't imagine even.
They can't imagine it. No, they can't. So we're up against a lot. I'm not going to say this is easy, and this is why we've written a bunch of really big books about it. We're trying to explain it to people.
But it's a question. On the other hand, it's a question of survival.
It is.
But
we're up against the edge here.
It's hard for people to see that because they're also in the mainstream and don't see left all right.
And they don't want to. At this point, there's a fair amount of active denial involved.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that this planet is in serious trouble, you are trying very hard not to see it. And I don't believe that anybody is that ignorant at this point. It's so obvious everywhere you look. And now we've had massive storm after massive storm. We've had, I don't know, I'm assuming here, I've heard about some of the ones in Europe as well, where there's never seen water like that coming out of the sky, never seen the river that high, people getting killed in floods, and they just had them in Scotland a few weeks ago, more floods. Like things people have literally never seen before are happening.
It's a kind of...
schizophrenia, yes, yeah, it is very much.
Because I've heard about asking young people between 18 and 25. In most of the countries, about 50 or more % of the young people don't believe that our civilization has a future.
Okay, well, they're right.
Yeah, but even if they know, they don't know what to do anyway. Yeah. We see that there is a growing consciousness on the one hand, but on the other hand, the mega machine, what Lewis Mumford told about, is still
alive and kicking.
Yeah. So, could you explain briefly how you see the global situation?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the mega machine, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So Lewis Mumford is probably still the best critic of civilization and industrial civilization in particular. And he's an interesting character because he started out really loving cities and writing histories of cities about how wonderful it was to have cities. And then he slowly came to realize that this was the problem. And he changed his mind, which most people don't really do. And I have a lot of respect for somebody who can do that. His best essay, everything is condensed in this one essay that's called Authoritarian and Democratic Techniques. And I think it was written in 1964. But you can find it. It's only about 12 pages long. Very easy to find online. And if you read nothing else by Lewis Mumford, just read that. Because he walks you through this whole process of how the worst thing that ever happened was this thing called the mega machine. So you have the state, and you have the army, and you have a priest class, most likely. And what they're able to do is to get hundreds, if not thousands of people to all work together in concert and to do things that humans never would have been able to do one-on-one. So devastate an entire piece of land, put some canals and some ditches through it so that it can be watered, build the waterworks for it, and then plant it all to barley or rice or corn or whatever. No human being alone could have done that. But all together, yes, you can conquer entire mountains doing this. And so he calls that the mega machine. And the mega machine has now got more and more industrial parts added onto it. And in fact, the machines have taken over as far as I can tell. In terms of weight, the mega machine has been estimated. And if you take the mass of all living creatures on the planet, the mega machine, so everything from cement to skyscrapers to our cell phones, weighs 7 times more now on the planet than all the living creatures on the planet. So the machines have won, all right? We don't even have to talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger and the whatever those movies were, the Terminator. It's here, it's all here. And we are, most of us, just gladly throwing our lives into this machine and just getting fed as, food for it. So that's what's happened across the globe, and it's everywhere. I mean, nobody seems able to resist it. We are going to need that resistance. So I'm very glad that people are at least somewhat aware of how bad the situation is. Mass extinction, global warming, toxins, topsoil loss, and all of this is a spiral heading ever downward. We know this. So what do? Well, anything humans build, they can unbuild. We can do this. This is the problem, right? We're not fighting chemistry, we're not fighting physics, we're not fighting gravity. We're fighting a human creation. So again, it's not intellectually that difficult, but how are we going to do it step by step? And I think that if we could provide them with a better plan, I think a lot of people would join. And that's the reason that we wrote a book called Deep Green Resistance, because we thought, well, we've got a plan, so let's lay it out and see if anybody wants to try it.
Yes, that's the point. I want to come to your book. So can you briefly summarize again where the thinking errors lie in renewable?
Okay. There's 3 main problems. The first problem is that what we are actually facing is the fact that our planet is being turned from biotic communities, living creatures, into dead commodities, and then into private wealth. So that's the flow. You've got life, then you've got dead things, and then you have all of that being bought and sold and making money for a very few people. That's the flow. And to my mind, the place that we have to intervene is right here. We need to stop the flow of living creatures being turned into these dead commodities. And that's being done on an industrial scale. So industrial logging, industrial fishing, industrial agriculture, certainly all of it requires industrial amounts of energy. So fossil fuel was the only thing that was ever going to power this. All right, so I think that's the problem. But a lot of people don't think that that's the problem. They think that that is a perfectly fine flow, and they would like that flow to continue. Even though we pretty much gutted the planet, that's not what they see the problem. The problem they think is, well, we need another way to fuel this destruction. I would like to stop the destruction. They would like to continue fueling it. And so they say, well, there must be a green, happy way to do this. What if we use wind and solar and biomass, and we can use ocean waves, and we can do all these other things, and then somehow we will fuel this conversion process, this industrial process. So that's the first problem, is that they've identified the problem completely in the opposite way that I have defined the problem. Because I actually care about the planet. They don't seem to. I don't know why they don't care about the planet, but they don't. As a movement, the environmental movement has got to take our movement back. We cannot let these green energy Judases decide that if we just have, solar and wind, we'll be fine, because they're completely misidentifying the problem. And in the book, we say that's solving for the wrong variable, because they're solving for, let's keep industrial civilization going. And we think the problem is industrial civilization is the problem. And my friend Jeff Gibbs made a really wonderful movie called Planet of the Humans. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it. But there's this great line where he says, will the machines of industrial civilization save us from industrial civilization? And I said, that's it exactly. He nailed it. I didn't know him at that point. I was watching the film, and he says that line, and I just started screaming. I'm standing there in my kitchen all by myself, and I was just like a kid at a rock concert. I was like, yes, he said it. And I was like, that's it. I need to be friends with this man. I'm going to hunt him down. I'm sending him an email. We've got to introduce myself. He's one of us. I've got to find him. So we are now friends, and he's absolutely wonderful. But that was the moment in that film where he got the problem.
Yeah,
he got the problem.
There are some people I know, and I'm very happy that through my life, I always met people. I found that connection. But rationally looking at the facts, our situation is almost hopeless.
Yes, it is.
Satish Kumar, in a letter to burned out activists, says not to look at outcomes. Activism does not serve to change the world, but as such, it changes the world. So how do you personally deal with the fact that our path, I suspect, is paved with small victories and many big defeats?
Yeah, one of our famous environmentalists said, all of our victories are temporary and all of our losses are permanent. And he's right, because it's extinction. They're never coming back. How do I deal with that? Well, partly it's just a question of each individual person's character. And I can't give somebody a new character. I just know that I don't give up. I'm just stubborn, maybe. I'm just stubborn. But I'm not giving up. I don't care. If there's one tree and 2 wolves, I'm going to fight for them because they're my people and they need me. So it has to be done. And I don't know what keeps other people going. I don't honestly have a lot of hope. I don't really care. I don't need hope to keep going. I just need to do what's right. And I just need to know that I'm doing everything in my power to bring this to a stop. And other people may need to feel hope to get out of bed in the morning. I don't actually. I can feel utter despair and keep fighting. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I have things in my life that feed me, and I highly suggest you get some if you don't have any. So I have really good relationships. I have wonderful friends. We all share this analysis. I couldn't do this alone if I didn't have people like my DGR friends. It would be impossible. Just psychologically, I wouldn't be able to take it. But I have those people. So if you don't have those people, find those people. That would be like my #1 piece of advice. And it may mean you lose a lot of friends, but if they're not really helping you survive the apocalypse, they're not really your friends. So find better friends, join us, join another group. You don't have to join us, join anybody you can find who's willing to face the facts of how bad this is. So that's number one. And then number two, find the things that do give you joy on a daily basis, because even in the horror, it is so beautiful out there. It is so beautiful. There are trees, there are spiders, there are snakes, there are fish. The rain fell last night. It smells so good to be alive. Just be an animal. Be an animal. Just, it's such a gift to be here. I don't know how we got so lucky. So don't lose track of that. You don't. I know there's so much despair. You can keep fighting through despair, though. I know you can. So find friends. Do whatever it is every day that gives you, you don't have to have hope, but just some joy. Some animal joy in being alive, I think, is enough now. And then we just have to get it done. We have to fight this fight.
What would you say to those who resign and think all resistance is futile?
I don't have anything to say to them.
Okay.
They're not worth it. They're not going to fight. I don't care. I would rather take somebody who isn't quite sure that resistance is possible or can't really quite face yet how bad the situation is, because I can talk to them. I mean, I can explain how bad it is, and I can also explain some things we should be doing. There's a lot of movement there that I can help make happen. But the ones who have just completely given up, like, oh, well, it's over. Let's just have a good time. I don't have time for it. I find them frustrating. Maybe they'll come back around at some point. It's true that throughout history in resistance movements, until the movement starts showing some success, a lot of people don't join. And then the moment that the resistance starts having some wins, all of a sudden more people want to join. So at the end of the day, those people may come back when they see that we're actually, like, there's a path forward here. We can take this apart. Maybe they'll join us then. And I invite them back in. Like, if you have this analysis, you get how bad it is, you can't join us now because you don't think it's possible. All right, fine. Go do the thing you're doing. I don't care what it is. But when this starts to really happen and you see that we're having some luck in it, come back. Like, we'll always take you back. It's never too late to join the resistance. Come on back. So that might happen. It might. But I don't waste my time with those people because they're sunk in it. They don't want to be talked out of it. They don't. So there's just nothing to be said. All right, fine. Go do your sad thing and I'll do my fighting thing.
And it's not possible to live without ecological footprint. Without electricity, for example, I would not be able to survive for a long time. I've not learned to do that. In a way, I need development help. Like, we go to primitive countries to develop them. But the other way around makes sense for me.
Right.
So I would need to learn quite a different kind of life. Yeah. How do you personally live?
My life is actually fairly low, kind of low energy, mostly because it makes me happy, not because I think it makes any difference. Because on a personal level, it really doesn't make that much difference. It's just like a nano bit at this point. The systems are so enormous. And like, you mentioned the Al Gore film. If every single person in America did every single one of the things in that film, the greenhouse gases would only drop 28% of the 100% that it needs. So most of the energy is used by industry. It's not like the energy used by my washing machine that's making it happen. It's the energy needed to make that washing machine that's the problem, right? The steel mill, that's the problem. The copper mine for the wiring, for the plug, that's the problem. It's not, the little bit of energy I'm using to run the thing. And this is the part that people don't understand. It's like the energy needed to make the car is the problem. The steel that goes into it, the cobalt that goes into it, the lithium that goes into it. And destruction. Yes, and all the destruction of all those mines, which are horrendous. Like, they're not going to heal in anything but a geologic timescale. That's how horrible mining is to the planet. And that's the issue. So it's not the little bits of energy that you and I are using that are the problem. Though those are going to have to go away eventually. So my house, I have a passive solar house. I have a very beautiful south-facing meadow. I got really lucky. I have a very small house. And I made it that way on purpose, and it's super insulated. On most days, the sun is enough to just heat the house passively. And then I have a really nice little wood stove that's extremely, energy efficient. And I have 5 acres of wood, so I have all the wood I'm ever going to need just to keep me warm. I have 5 dogs. They keep me warm too. They're very furry and they're very hot. So if I shut the bedroom door, it is warm in that room in the morning. I step outside, it'll be like 20 degrees cooler in the hallway just from the body heat from the dogs. Anyway, I love my dogs. Yeah, so I do that. And then I'm also very lucky because I've grown a lot of my own food over the years. I don't do that now. I just don't have time. Like building the resistance is way more important to me than doing that work. I thoroughly enjoyed having animals and having chickens and goats. Not like it was incredibly, it really fulfilled me sort of spiritually, emotionally. I just loved it, but I don't have time. Like you have to be there for the animals if you're going to have them. And I can't do it. It's hard, I know. So I was like, I just had to give it up for now. Like maybe when I'm really old and I just can't do anything anymore, I'll do that instead. I loved it though. I mean, I don't really find that, that's such a grim future. Like when I think about the things that have made me really happy, a lot of it is those things. So oh no, we're not going to have, we won't. So what? We'll have something else. And it might be better. I think people were happier then. People now are not happy. So anyway, I have passive solar house. I have my wood stove. I've got my dogs. I've got some land.
And I've access to nature.
Oh, totally. It's right. The redwoods right there. And I've saved 2 plots of fairly large amounts of land. Like all the money I ever earned went into saving those lands. So I have no retirement. You're welcome to donate, but it's all fine. All the money I had, I bought. There were big pieces of land that were really I have wetlands on my property, but the properties that were next door was really where the little stream, the river runs through, and there's still coho salmon in those streams, and they were being sold for development. I was like, that's the end of the salmon. We're watching it happen. So all the money I had, all the money I could raise was thrown into saving those pieces of land. So they are about to be permanently put aside in a land trust, and I'm super excited about this. So even when I'm dead, that land, I won't own it at all. It'll be owned by the land trust, and then forever it will be protected. This just makes me incredibly happy. Like if I did nothing else, I saved that land. And Derek Jensen is doing the same with his. So all of our land is about to be permanently safe. We have bears. I just want everybody to understand this. We have mountain lions on our land, enormous cats, mountain lions. So the fact that we have apex level predators means that there's something good going on out there because they can survive. But they can't survive humans. They just can't. They're too shy. And they will be gone if they build more houses back there. So we really had to save that land. So we did. And I feel incredibly happy about that. So that land is permanently saved. I've got my little plot right here. Yeah, and so because I live in a rural area, I'm able to do food in the way that feels the best to me, which is to say it's all based on perennial grasslands. So it's all grass-fed. So the chickens are up on pasture every day. They just live in the woods and the fields. All the beef and the bison, they're out on pasture. They're all building topsoil. They're repairing the water table. The habitat's being restored. Like, it's so beautiful to go and see where my food comes from. And it's right there. It's all in my neighborhood, so I don't have to go far. And this is just one of those things that makes me particularly very happy. It does not have to make you happy, but it's one of the things that I feel like I do that is on a low level, very restorative, reparative. And then I talk about it a lot too. So I want other people to do it. Because there is really a whole movement in the United States of people trying to do this well, trying to repair the soil, trying to get the carbon out of the sky into the soil where it belongs. We can still do this, but trying to get everybody on board. It's going to have to be a bottom-up movement. Like the government's never going to get on this, not till it's too late. So we need to be doing it from the bottom up. So it's very important to me, just personally, to be doing that stuff, and I enjoy it. So that is good. It all works together in my life. So. For other people, it's going to be other things. I understand that. Maybe starting a school for children to raise them in a better way. Like, I think that's really important. I hated public school. I really love some of the alternative models people have come up with that are child-led and all that, and heartfelt. So it could be a doctor. Be the thing that you think is doing the most good in the world. But, those are the things that I do in my personal life that feel important to me. So my house uses very little energy, and I'm very comfortable. So it can be done.
Well, so it was nearly the answer on my last question. What would you like to leave your listeners with the closing message?
So I like to say that love is a verb, right? Yeah. It's not a noun, it's a verb. And if anybody is alive 100 years from now, they are going to wonder what was wrong with us, that we didn't fight like hell when the world was going down. And if you love something, it is under assault. Every last creature